Let us turn to the fourth and final presentation on the topic of civil religion. And as you remember, I told you that the progression of the American civil religion was first rather Christian in emphasis at the end of the 19th century, and when it progressed to the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century to a portrayal of a civil religion in almost exclusive non-Christian terms. And this needs to be kept in mind in order to understand truly the nature of that particular civil religion. In essence, it was never true Christianity. And I believe my thesis holds water, holds true, if I state again explicitly that the civil religion in America was the most effective rival religion to true Christianity. It was never Christianity itself. I would wish it would have been Christianity. But the real nature of the civil religion was that it was never Christianity as such. It portrayed itself to be Christianity or the Christian faith. But its true nature came out in the more recent past, and it showed itself to be something completely different from a Christian faith. As a matter of fact, it was and is the same civil religion which we encountered, which we discovered in France at the end of the 18th century. This was and is the civil religion of America. In order to explain how I came to that conclusion, I will go through certain concepts which need to be kept in mind or addressed in regards to the American civil religion. In the more recent past, the following terms, different terms, were used to describe that civil religion. A political religion, or a political theology, or a civil philosophy, a cultural religion, a meta-narrative, or cultural mores, or a way of life. And you see very quickly by just looking at that list of terms that if you would use these terms to describe true Christianity, it would not really work. If you use the term political religion for Christianity, well, you would miss the mark by a large margin, because Christianity is not a political religion at all. Now, it has political ramifications, I'm not denying that. Each religion has. But to describe the essence of a Christian faith in terms of politics would miss the mark. Jesus has said, "My kingdom is not of this world," when he was standing in front of Pilate just hours before he was crucified. So it's not a political religion. It's not a political theology. It's not even a civil philosophy or a cultural religion. Now, once again, let me reiterate, it has political ramifications. It has cultural ramifications. It will influence a specific society. If the Christian faith is strong, if its influence is strong on a society, the society will assume a certain outlook which is in conformity with some Christian values. But just to look at Christianity as a cultural phenomenon would not describe Christianity truly as Christianity wants to be understood. Often, if you listen to news commentators, they say, well, Christian values or Western values, and in the minds of many, these Western values are equated with Christian values. But I would like to beg to differ. Western values, even though they are in some ways influenced by Christian values, are not the same as Christian values. You have to separate both. Some Western values are individualism, human rights, civil liberties, equality, democracy, welfare. These are called Western values. But if you look at each of these values, and if you compare them with the Christian message, you cannot equate these values with any kind of true Christian value. Just one example, human rights. Is this a Christian value? Human rights sounds good. And often we hear praises in our society of human rights. We need to have human rights. But where did this notion, this understanding of human rights come about? What is the origin of it? It is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophy, which he also called the religion of democracy, which stood in utter opposition to the Christian faith. Equality sounds good too. But this was exactly what Jean-Jacques Rousseau wanted to promote. Egalitarianism. This is what he tried to promote and bring, obviously, to the society which would adopt his philosophy, which years after his death obviously was the French nation. Is it truly a Christian value if everyone thinks the same, if everyone does the same, if everyone pays homage to the state, and so on and so forth? I don't believe this is a Christian value. As a matter of fact, I believe this is far removed from any Christian value whatsoever. But nonetheless, a value system provides direction, purpose, and cohesion for a society. I don't diminish that particular understanding of values. That is indeed the case. Where do we get these values being imparted to us? Well, obviously, we don't come into this world with a set system of values. Somewhere in our growing up years, these values are being imparted to us. And some of these sources are primary, secondary, and higher education, public ceremonies, mass media, civil service oaths, church services, entertainment, and the military. And this is not a complete list. We could mention quite a number of other sources. But nonetheless, I believe these are the primary sources where these particular values of a society are being imparted to us, where we pick up on that particular value system which is operative in our particular society where we live. And I believe if I just pick out one particular source, mass media, I believe this is possibly the most influential source where these values are being propagated and spread. And obviously these values don't stay the same. I believe you would agree with me that if we would watch some TV program in the 50s or early 60s or even mid-60s, and if we would compare them with some sitcoms of our time, the values which are being propagated would be very different. I'm just thinking, for example, of a Andy Griffith show, and I do like that show. It makes me laugh to see Barney Fife and Opie and so on and so forth. Yes, it makes me laugh, and at least in most shows, as a general statement, the values which are being portrayed in an Andy Griffith show would be much closer to a Christian value system over against some of the modern sitcoms. Church services are very important. This is how the values of a more Christian nature was being spread in American society up to the 60s, I would say. Because up to the 60s, most people were still going to a local church on a regular basis. Nowadays, obviously, it has changed. The TV has become possibly the source where most of these values are being spread, but also education. Movies, most certainly. This is a slide which I had to include just to let you know that I don't think that if you perceive a civil religion as a problem from a Christian perspective, and I do, that this is a uniquely American problem. Not at all. I believe it's a universal problem. And I'm just using America as a prime example. But I could just as well use Germany as my example. But you would not be able to relate as readily if I would use Germany as an example. You are much more familiar with the American scene. And this is why I pick America as my example in this particular presentation. But we always have to understand that it is a worldwide phenomenon. And these particular notions of a civil religion are being propagated worldwide. And are meant to be propagated worldwide. Because, remember, this was Jean-Jacques Rousseau's objective, which Robespierre eventually expressed in one of his public speeches. No, we want to regenerate France, and we almost succeeded. But this is only half of a world as he described it. Our final objective is the entire world. And how this has been, to some degree, accomplished was by means of a universal Declaration of Human Rights, published on the 10th of December 1948. The United Nations is the main organization which is spreading these concepts of a civil religion across national boundaries as far as they possibly can around the globe. So if I do criticize the concept and the outworkings of a civil religion, which I do from a Christian perspective, obviously I need to criticize the United Nations and what the United Nations does, first and foremost, and I do. But I cannot do it now. I do not want it to do it now because I'm still focused, I'm still intent on explaining the American civil religion. But still, let me add that to the presentation as well. Just a few quotes from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The preamble states, recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. If the source of the outlook of this particular universal civil religion is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and this is what it is, then we have to understand terms like freedom, justice, and peace in terms of the definition which Jean-Jacques Rousseau has given these terms. Do not understand these terms as they are normally understood. Because if the term freedom is being used, I would agree. But does the term freedom as it's used in this particular declaration mean the same thing of what I mean freedom to be? Or does it mean what Jean-Jacques Rousseau meant by that term? And my argument would be, it is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's understanding of that particular term, which is anything but freedom as I understand it. It's utter authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and I'm totally opposed to that. But this is how we are being deceived, and this is deliberately done. It's done deliberately. Because we would readily agree with concepts of freedom, justice, and peace. But this is not what is truly meant by these terms used in the context of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. If we wouldn't know the source of that particular statement, if we wouldn't know that it was taken out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we could take that particular quote and incorporate it in a speech, a public speech of Robespierre. We wouldn't find much difference, or hardly any difference, between what Robespierre actually said. For example, on that 8th of June, 1794, when he addressed that huge crowd of people who had congregated on the Champ de Mars in Paris to celebrate the religion of the Supreme Being. There would be hardly any difference. And it should sound similar to what Robespierre said, because the source of that philosophy, which is also a religion, is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, once again. Robespierre was inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. That particular Declaration of Human Rights is inspired by the religion of democracy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, there were some theologians and some others, but one theologian in particular, Reinhold Niebuhr, here in America, who discovered certain dangers of the civil religion which he perceived to be in force in America. I quote from his book, The Irony of American History, which was published in 1962. Within that context of American civil religion, he observed the ironic tendency of virtues to turn into vices when too complacently relied upon. He perceived the failure of spiritual elements of civil religion to be a check against totalitarianism. The question is why? The question is why? And the answer to that is because the civil religion promotes totalitarianism. This is why. It's not a check against it. it's the main force promoting it. And apart from my criticism that it has nothing to do with Christianity, true Christianity, even though it appears like it is Christianity, my main argument against it is because it is the strongest force to bring totalitarianism to our society. Under the name of Christianity, under the name of freedom, peace, justice. Reinhold Niebuhr also perceived a propensity for misuse. Now, I believe he was correct, but I would go a step further. I would say it was not misused, the civil religion was not misused, but perception of Niebuhr and many others was that it wanted to accomplish a certain objective, whereas in reality it wanted to accomplish something totally different. And when Niebuhr saw the contrast, the disparity between the two, the pretended objective and the true nature of it, and he said, well, there's a misuse of that particular religion. But I think what he truly observed was the true working out of that particular civil religion over against its pretended objective. Idolatrous worship of the state nationalism. Well, that's straight out of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract, right? If that particular if that particular civil religion is really the very same thing which Jean-Jacques Rousseau promoted, then it should promote or should put the state as the highest objective. And it does. This is the highest value. There's nothing beyond the state. The state determines everything. Me being a citizen of that particular state has the obligation to serve that state and nothing but the state. And in that sense, you see that it is something completely different from true Christianity. That because in true Christianity we serve the Almighty God, who is the sovereign, who stands far above any state. And my allegiance is first and foremost to that Christian God who revealed himself in his Son Jesus Christ, and not to the state. Now, Jesus Christ told me that I should pray for all those in authority, that I should be obedient to the laws of the country. Romans 13, for example. That I should respect the governing authorities of a state. 1 Peter. But my highest allegiance, my strongest allegiance, is not to the state as the final authority. It is to God Almighty. And when the assumption of divine authority without responsible self-restraint. Once again, this is what Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a liberal theologian, criticized or saw as negative, as a danger in regards to a civil religion. And I would, in a general sense, I would again agree with him. The American civil religion identifies the nation's ideals with God's. And I'm just repeating what Reinhold Niebuhr said. National self-righteousness, dangerous arrogance, imperialism, and racism. I included this image of the apotheosis of George Washington. What does apotheosis mean? George Washington being put on the throne of God. This is what apotheosis means. George Washington becoming God. And I believe that image is taken from the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his famous book, Democracy in America, wrote in 1835 the following. Americans are, quote, constantly taught that they are the only religious, enlightened, and free people. They see that democratic institutions flourish among them, whereas they come to grief in the rest of the world. Consequently, they have an immensely high opinion of themselves and are not far from believing that they form a species apart from the rest of the human race. End of quote. Just recall that Alexis de Tocqueville was very favorably disposed towards most of the things he discovered here in America when he came to visit, to describe a democracy in America. In 1835, just keep that date in mind. But he had some things to criticize, and that was one of his criticisms. And in quite, I believe in a general sense, he was quite right. I believe America did succeed spectacularly in implementing a republican system of government. And in many ways, it did produce very positive results. But the downside of that was that, again, in general terms, Americans were starting to think about themselves that they are especially blessed by God, or that special gifts or abilities which other people don't have. And there is a certain danger in that particular outlook, as you possibly can imagine. But let me make the major transition now to the main argument of these four presentations. I call it Neo-Jacobinism. Neo-Jacobinism. Neo means new. So a new kind of Jacobinism. And Jacobinism obviously refers directly to the Jacobin clubs of revolutionary France in the end, at the latter part of the 18th century. And the person who came up with that term, and I believe he was correct in using that term or coining that term, was Claes, and he is the professor of politics at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. He's originally from Sweden, but spent most of his teaching career here in the United States. And he wrote a very influential book called America the Virtuuos, The Crisis of Democracy and the Quest for Empire. That book was first published in 2003. Prior to the publication of this book, he had already written and published another book which he called the Neo-Jacobinism. The Neo-Jacobinism as the main title. And then this book was basically a revised version of that earlier book. Revised and expanded version. Let me quote from this book. In the second half of the 20th century, a distinctly American form of Jacobinism evolved, rhetorically dedicated to doing good for the world, but fundamentally motivated by a will to dominate. There's a direct quote out of this book, right from the introduction of the book on chapter 3. Page 3, first chapter. So the entire book, and I did read the book not just once. The entire book presents the case, presents the thesis, presents the argument that what has become the American civil religion is nothing else but Jacobinism. The Jacobinism of France, of revolutionary France. And he makes an utterly convincing case. I believe, and that's a dangerous statement to make, but I believe if you would read that book with an open mind, you would ultimately come to the same conclusion. Because he not only describes the philosophy, he goes back to the philosophy of the original Jacobins in France, describes those. And in some ways, I did include certain statements from his book in my earlier presentations. And then he makes the comparison to certain policies being promoted by both political parties, not just one, not just the Democrats, not just the Republicans, both parties, at least some politicians within both parties. Now, there are some politicians within both parties also who oppose it. That is also important to keep in mind. But those politicians who do promote Jacobinism, or that new version of Jacobinism, can be clearly identified. And Claes, being a professor of politics, identifies these individuals. And later on, I have a short list of perhaps the best-known representatives of neo-Jacobinism. And we will just quickly go through that list. I will not explain too much in regards to the individuals on that list, because in some ways you actually know perhaps much more about these individuals than I do, because they are very well-known politicians. So keep that last line of that quote in mind, a will to dominate. And that was Robespierre's highest objective. He wanted to set up a state which dominates the entire nation from top to bottom. And everyone needs to think the same and do the same. Claes explains why Jacobinism is dangerous. And I insert here a quick footnote. I am of the same opinion. So Claes has convinced me that his case is convincing to me. And I do agree that with his assessment of Jacobinism to be dangerous, because it's totalitarian. This is why I think it's dangerous. This is why Claes thinks it's dangerous. Claes equates the rise of Jacobinism with the general decline of Western civilization. Once again, I do agree with that assessment, because Western civilization was strongly influenced by Christianity. And since the influence of Christianity has declined over the centuries, Western civilization has changed, and I believe has changed radically, has become much more open to accept Jacques Rousseau's religion of democracy over against Christianity. And this is a reason, I would say, one of the main reasons of the decline of Western civilization. He points out that neo-Jacobinism is not conservatism. And that is a very important point, because opponents of neo Jacobinism, which in its essence was what we would now call ultra-liberalism or leftism. Ultra, the most extreme form of liberalism or leftism, was Jacobinism in its original form as well as in its new version. It is anything but conservative. As a matter of fact, it's on the farthest opposing end to true conservatism. And yet, it portrays itself as being conservative. Question why? Well, it's very easy to understand. If you want to have those on your side who are conservative, to further your objectives of liberalism called conservatism, well, it would be foolish to portray yourself as a liberal. You would be much more apt to succeed if you would say, I'm a conservative. When you have the conservatives on your side, and when you just need to impart your philosophy on that particular group of conservative followers, telling them what you want to see accomplished is something which any conservative would agree on. But if you are in reality a left-wing liberal of the extreme kind, ultimately all your followers will promote a policy which is in utter opposition to true conservatism. So once again, Claes points out that neo-Jacobinism is not conservatism. The most unconservative aspect is its lack of humility. Western civilization rests on humility, explicit recognition of man's limitations to shape the world. Instead of changing the whole world according to your ideals, calling it the regeneration of the world. True conservatism says the very opposite. Our means, our abilities are not good enough to change the entire world according to our ideals. And obviously we have precedents. We can point to certain precedents in regards to the high value of humility within Western civilization, which was regarded very highly for many centuries and then obviously lost its importance within Western civilization. Now we can go back to Greek culture. Greek culture was infused with cautionary tragedies, plays, and fables that document the most dangerous of human frailties. Hubris, and hubris is defined as excessive pride or self-confidence or arrogance. So even within the ancient Greek culture, they had plays and fables and so forth, warning the Greeks not to fall into the pit of hubris. But extolling humility. And the same can be said about Christianity. Christianity regarded pride as the cardinal sin. And it extolled the virtue of self-control. Remember, self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So, Christianity valued humility or being humble or exercising self-control very highly. And the flip side was that it warned anyone to be prideful. pride comes before the fall, as we all know. Let's look a bit deeper, a bit closer at neo-Jacobinism. And I'm quoting certain statements again from Claes' book, America the Virtuuos. By the way, why did he call them? Why did he use the term virtuous in the title? Doesn't that sound good? He's criticizing neo-Jacobinism in the entire book, and he used the title where virtuous is one of 3 words. Now remember what Robespierre wanted to achieve. Remember that report to the convention? He wanted to set up a republic of virtue. So the entire philosophy of Jacobinism was contained in that term virtue. Okay, let's just read that particular quote, or these quotes from Claes' book. The Jacobins of the late 18th century, inspired by the writings of Rousseau and other Enlightenment thinkers, expressed a stark alternative to the traditional view of humility. Indeed, they repudiated it altogether, it meaning humility. Similarly, modern neo-Jacobinism, the ideology of virtuous empire, has taken root in the most powerful and culturally influential nation of the Western world. And the signs are now everywhere that the will to dominate is breaking free of such traditional restraints. End of quote. And that is the main characteristic of neo-Jacobinism. Wherever you encounter that particular attitude, you encounter neo-Jacobinism. It's the utter repudiation of Christian humility. We can spread our philosophy across the world, and everyone has to fall in step. Neo-Jacobins view the past as a dark prison from which humanity must be liberated. Construct as alternative America that fulfills Enlightenment dreams of emancipation, abstract natural rights, and unbridled democratism. And democratism is just another term for the religion of democracy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's religion of democracy. Subvert the decentralist constitutional democracy of the founders. Now keep this in mind. Let me pause here. Keep this in mind. It is something completely different from what the founders of America wanted to see implemented. I hope you see the difference. The American founders wanted to diffuse power. This is why they instigated or put in place the division of powers: executive, legislative, and judiciary. Neo-Jacobins are enemies of pre-Enlightenment Western civilization, are driven towards greater and greater concentrations of power. So these are very clear statements in regards to the philosophy, the objectives, the policies of those who follow the neo-Jacobinism as Claes defines it here. And these are all elements of that former Jacobinism. I hope you see the parallels. And they are religious objectives. Don't forget that. I'm not talking about political objectives first and foremost, even though they are also political objectives, but they are religious objectives first and foremost. In order for us to understand the difference, and this is very important, the difference between the neo-Jacobins, once again, they are the ultra left-wing liberals, if we use our terminology of today, and the conservatives, the true conservatives on the other side. It is helpful to compare one with the other. And I don't have too much time, but I will select a few aspects to help you understand the vast differences. And once again, my objective is to help you understand that the neo-Jacobins are not conservatives. They are anything but conservative. Okay, let's just look through this list of what a true conservative would be. Conservatives stand in awe of a higher power. Ancient Greeks revered the good, the true, and the beautiful. Others refer to the will of God. Higher reality is not some ideological blueprint. So we look to some higher reality. In my case, being a Christian, I would look to the Christian God who revealed himself in his Son, Jesus Christ, as transcending any human power, any human authority, any state which a human can put in place. This is a true conservative. Someone who is not a true conservative would stop at the level of state power, even though he may invoke a supreme being. But don't be fooled. He doesn't mean a supreme being which transcends this world as such. The power of that supreme being is concentrated in the state. True conservatives feel obligated to look for and to do the right thing. Not the same as to know just what it is in any particular circumstance. Now, a neo-Jacobins would say, I know exactly what is the right thing to do in every single situation. He is led by abstract moral principles. And by moral principles, I don't mean truly moral. I mean principles which he has come up with and defines as good. And he said, a neo-Jacobin or a neo-Jacobin says, due to the fact that I have these abstract principles, I know what to do in every single case because I can apply these abstract principles to every single case. Whereas a conservative would be much more hesitant to say that. He will look at a specific situation, and when he would think of certain principles he has learned or values he has learned in the past, hopefully informed by the value system of the Bible, and then he would make up his mind to do certain things which he thinks are right. True conservatives feel obligated, I already said that. True conservatives are disinclined to make sweeping categorical assertions. The reason for that is life is way too complex. I cannot know beforehand to solve every single problem which I will encounter sometime in the future. I cannot know that beforehand. I need to get into a certain situation and then obviously make up my mind what would be the right course to take. And also life is unpredictable. So who are the neo-Jacobins in our time, here in this country? Once again, I could use Germany as an example. You have neo-Jacobins in Germany. I can point to the most influential politicians in Germany and say they are a perfect example of a neo-Jacobin. But who are the neo-Jacobins here in this country? They have access to universal, or at least they think so. They think they have access to universal principles. Have unquestioning faith in their own moral superiority. You are either for their principles, which makes you virtuous, or you are against them, which makes you evil. But they know what is right, good, and true in every single situation. And you just have to align yourself with their particular perspective. They assume a right to have their way. Behind moralism hides a desire to dominate. Well, I used 3 different logos. And I believe you would agree with me that what I just told you about the neo-Jacobins, that they have an unquestioning faith in their own moral superiority. And you have to either follow their principles, and when you are virtuous, or if you are against them, you are evil. I believe it would fit quite a number of news shows which you see on cable TV or public television. MSNBC, CBS, and CNN. I believe they are the epitome of that particular outlook. The epitome. And I think we could see this during the last, let's say, 4 to 5 months, very clearly. Presented every single day, almost ad nauseum. Once again, what would be a true conservative? They are patriots, deeply rooted in the best of their own heritage. And I totally affirm that. I stand on the side of conservatism. Whatever I say about the conservatives, I do affirm. True conservatives can understand and appreciate corresponding achievements in other cultures, are able to find in different places variations on a common human theme. The culturally distinctive contributions of other peoples deepen and enrich his awareness of goodness, truth, and beauty. I do affirm all of that. And all of these values are taken from different books written by American authors who represent conservative ideology or conservative viewpoint. By contrast, once again, let's look at the neo-Jacobins. And my sources again, or my main source again, is Claes' earlier book, the Neo-Jacobinism. Neo-Jacobins are not interested in diversity, only in imposing their liberal blueprint. Remember, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was utterly opposed to diversity. Once again, everyone has to think and do the same. All diversity has to be eliminated. And the same outlook is true for the new Jacobins, the neo-Jacobins. They pursue a grandiose scheme for remaking the world. To ensure a democratic world, America must establish armed and uncontested world supremacy. Remember, democracy is not what you and I think of democracy. It is Jean-Jacques' version of democracy. meaning totalitarianism. And neo-Jacobins see no need for restraints on virtues as defined by Robespierre, virtuous power. Old restraints and liberties must yield to the needs of a virtuous national security state. This is Jacobinism. Robespierre was a member of the Committee of Public Security. This is the group of the governing council. This was the governing council of which Robespierre was a member. Committee of Public Security. If you have a neo-Jacobin policy in place in any country, you would call one government agency which has a lot of power the Department of Homeland Security. This is the essence of Jacobinism. Once again, what is a true conservative? He fears unlimited power because of his belief in original sin. If you give one human being who is sinful too much power, ultimately he will abuse that power for his own benefit. Thus, it's better not to give him all that power, or to give him as less power as possible. A conservative cherishes local autonomy and strong communities, asserts that people should be able to shape their own lives, not have to follow a state dictate, harbor no illusions about their international arena, want to be prepared to handle threats to their own society and civilization or to international peace, and try to diffuse conflict and to pursue a common human ground. Remember, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was utterly opposed to pacifism. A conservative would be very interested in preserving peace, international peace first and foremost. He would not be interested in starting any wars. Neo-Jacobinism is again described by Claes as follows. He blames Neo-Jacobinism for transforming a more modest old Republic of America into an aggressive, ideological, revolutionary state. Now again, these are the words of Claes, professor of politics at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. A neo-Jacobin is bent on setting up an empire, driven to remake the world in its own image. America has actually abandoned its moorings in classical culture, jettisoned the ballast of its Christian heritage, and has become a messianic universal nation. And I give you the page numbers out of that book, America the Virtuuos. So these are not my own words and ideas, even though I do agree with Claes' perspective. Neo-Jacobins have access to the military, diplomatic, and economic might of the only superpower in the world, conceded that gaining such access was the goal all along. This is why the neo-Jacobins in American politics try to ascend to power in order to use that military power of this large nation for their purposes, attach themselves to the United States less, and I'm quoting, less because they identified with the actual historically evolved American nation with its ancient origins in the Western past, than because they recognized the utility of the might of the United States. It's a very important statement which Claes makes. And when neo-Jacobins do not recognize the ostensible grand and noble goals are fatally undermined by immoral means and, more important, by man's limitations. And Claes wonders, have Americans become so imbued with utopianism and arrogance that nothing short of some great disaster will awaken a sense of humility and limits? Are they still capable of heeding the advice of leading figures from their own past? The strength of the analysis of Claes is his identification of deep discontinuities in American history and experience. The original American Republic had very different objectives, was set up in a very different fashion from what the neo-Jacobins want it to be in our time. American civilization is rooted in the heritage of Greece and Rome, Western Christendom and British culture. America emerged from a particular past, a concrete historical experience. America's old moral ethos acknowledged the binding authority of tradition and custom and the contingencies of particular circumstances. America is indebted to that past for its culture, political institutions, and freedoms. Now, all of this would be looked upon positively by Claes as well as myself. This is how America was set up originally. This is what America should have been all along. And for many, many years, for many decades, actually followed through with these values. And when Claes advocates a policy of responsible nationhood, self-restraint and respect for others in the international arena, a policy that is cosmopolitan but not globalistic and threatening, patriotic but not closed in upon itself. A country has no reason to interfere militarily or otherwise with other countries except to protect its own vital interests and defend itself against threats. Who are the neo-Jacobins in American politics? Who are they? They can be clearly identified. Now, once again, these are those who do not promote a conservative policy. Neo-Jacobins are the very opposite of conservatives, true conservatives. Now, they may call themselves conservatives, but they portray their true objectives by the things they do. Well, I just went to Wikipedia and just typed in the names of those I knew to be neo-Jacobins, and they are identical to that group which calls itself neo-conservatives. They are identical. The neo-conservatives are the neo-Jacobins. This is the group. So let's just go very quickly through this list, and it's a very short list of a list which could be much longer, and we are coming fairly close to the end. Among the politicians, well, it's Jeb Bush. And I'm just using the names of politicians who are in power. I could have said George W. Bush, but he's not in power anymore. Newt Gingrich, Lindsey Graham, Tim Pawlenty, Peter T. King, and I just pick some of them. I won't name all of them. Joe Lieberman, John McCain, Mitt Romney, among government officials, and some of them are not in power anymore either. William Bennett, Victoria Nuland, Jean Kirkpatrick, Paul Wolfowitz, Karl Rove, Richard Pearl, academics Francis Fukuyama, Donald Kagan, Victor Davis Hanson, public figures, again, just a few names. Robert Kagan, Charles Krauthammer, Rush Limbaugh, David Froome, Jonah Goldberg, William Crystal, and so on and so forth. Among the publications, Commentary, Front Page Magazine, The Public Interest, The Weekly Standard, The Washington Free Beacon. I could also use, could have included The Wall Street Journal, for example. Among the publications, perhaps the best known is National Review, which has always been the publication identified with neoconservatism. And obviously, William Buckley, the man in the middle, was a founder of National Review. And in a very interesting turn of events, just prior to the last election, you could see the true colors come out in regards to what the National Review truly stood for. Well, they published an issue, and you can see it on the right side, against Trump. National Review, neoconservatism, against Trump. And another issue, well, showing Hillary Clinton's face, and when we are ready now. They were utterly in support of Hillary Clinton as a presidential candidate. National Review, the flagship publication of neoconservatism. And I have one more slide to show you, and it's perhaps the most controversial, but I can make a very, very strong case that what I say about it is utterly true. And I tried to do so in the last 4 hours, giving these 4 different presentations to build up my case to the very last slide. And my question would be, what is the utter left wing, the most extreme left wing news channel of America? The news channel which tops every other in regards to promoting left-wing liberalism, the very essence of left-wing liberal propaganda in America, the very essence of it. Now, you saw some logos of other news channels, which I also consider to be propaganda channels of neo-Jacobinism. CNN in particular. CBS, excuse me. But what is the most extreme news channels of all of them in regards to promoting left-wing liberalism? Here it is. And I know this will come as a shock to most. In this context, I do agree with that. Or I'm very well aware of that. But that headline of one of the images I selected, neo-Kant, is very apropos, very fitting in regards to describing the philosophy, the intent, the thrust, the impact of this particular news channel, and it's Fox News. Because Hillary Clinton is a neo-conservative. Remember, National Review was all about promoting her presidency as a flagship publication of neoconservatism. She is a neoconservative. So are all the others which are pictured here. Some of them are not in power anymore, but had a very influential role to play in previous years. And it saddens me to say it. I wished there would be a true conservative news channel in this country, but there is none. There are still probably some, or perhaps even quite a number of radio stations. But in terms of cable TV news, there is none. And this needs to be said. And I say it here. And I can make a very strong case for it. Fox News is a propaganda channel of neo-Jacobinism. And it's the first and foremost propaganda channel of that particular outlook. Now, do they use the term conservative? Yes, on many shows. Do they have true conservatives on their shows once in a while? Yes, I do. Judge Neapolitan, I believe it's called, Neapolitano, is one of the true conservatives in this country, and he appears on Fox News quite frequently. And I do agree with his outlook in most cases of what I read and hear him say. But this is only a means to deceive you. Making you believe it's a true conservative channel, whereas in its essence, in its very essence, it is anything but. So this is where the rethinking has to start. We need to understand the nature of a problem. And we also need to guard ourselves, especially our mind, from being influenced by news outlets which pretend to be something and are the very opposite of it. And sadly enough, we have spent many, many hours listening to news programs of Fox News, believing it's truly conservative. And we have been conditioned to accept neo-Jacobinism as the governing philosophy of this country and ultimately of the world, because there are so-called neo-conservatives in other countries as well. Germany could be used. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel could be used as a perfect example of someone who poses to be a conservative, while she does everything in her power to oppose true conservatism. Everything in her power. And sadly enough, the same is true for this country. And this is where we need to change our thinking. And it's a deliberate effort to disassociate ourselves from that kind of propaganda. Thank you very much for your patience and for your attention to listen to me.